I'd like to continue to read this book about ethnicity or tribalism and its relationship to the religion. And I was talking about Christianity and Buddhism approach, mainly in the past. But in this segment, I think Daisetz is talking more into the characteristics of the Christianity and Buddhism, especially Pure Land sect, which many of you may not know. But it's interesting comparison that we can make. So if I start with the Christ case, the major two events there is the death on the cross as well as the resurrection. And if we don't have those, the Christianity may not exist. So this could be historical record or the symbolized idea. Whatever the case is, this may not happen except in the tribe of Jewish people. That's his opinion, Daisetz's opinion. And he's comparing that to the situation in Buddhism, where, especially talking about the Pure Land sect of Buddhism, not so much into Zen. It's hard to describe what's the difference, but let me just explain that within the Buddhist idea, the religion, there are various segments, and the Zen may be more for the intellectuals, and the Shin Buddhism or the Pure Land sect of Buddhism may be toward more compassion. And Daisetz is comparing that sense of Pure Land sect, how they processed the idea within the Indian ethnicity or tribe at the time versus the Christian in the Jewish situation. So what he says is that the Pure Land sect, the idea behind there is very much like a Christianity. So Amida Buddha is the one kind of corresponding to the role of God, if you want to compare. The idea there is that after long eons of training and to be awakened, and with that, his mission was to help the people to live well. So that's the turning around. If you compare to the death and the resurrection of Christ, that's opposite almost, that the case of Shin Buddhism or the Pure Land sect, which is bigger than Shin Buddhism, but the orientation is such that there's no death, but death perhaps of the ego for the training, if you call that. That was the case for Amida Buddha, and from that came back to help people. So Christ was with his own death and carrying the sin of people. Amida's case is for his own enlightenment, and then basically going beyond himself to be resurrected, if you want to call it, or rebirth, and come up to help the people. So Christianity is more into one's action and the consequence. Amida or Shin Buddhism or Pure Land sect is thought what causes people to suffer and relate it to the self, ego, and process it in the matter of not physical death, but death of ego, if you want to call it. So no self. And for that, no mind was the process or the state that is processed or experienced in Buddha's awakening. So that's the within Buddhism orientation of Shin Buddhism, which is different from Zen, which Daisetz is not talking here, but the compassionate sense of hell, which also exists in Zen, but in Shin Buddhism is compared to the case in the Christianity. So the truth in living in a spiritual state is to die to live. So if you simply say that, you can see that that's what it is. But according to the psychological state, actual evidence, whatever that is more for the Christ to be there, to be on the cross and to resurrect, compared to Indian state where Amida, the awakening, came from inner challenge of what's in there, to die himself and to come back to help others. So there's a difference between those. Not to say which is good or bad or right and wrong. Tribe, evidence, history, indication, and the environment that people grab those ideas may have some implication of the local situation, tribe mentality, and all of that to go through the historical issues. So in Christianity, Daisetz feels, and I'm in my case too, there's a blood or drink the blood of Christ, whatever that expression that there is, that we notice or he noticed. And the Buddha's case, there's not much of such killing, but the self, how to eliminate your ego, so to speak, which causes lots of suffering. So those are the basic background and sort of analysis that he has made. So just a few more sentences here is that the idea before Buddha is Veda and Upanishad and those metaphysical almost idea may not have come out in Jewish tribe, but in India. Whether there was a Chinese influence, I just thought about it because it looks like there was some communication going on between China and India before 2000 or 2,500 years ago, in China with Taoism, for example, and their pragmatic orientation versus Indian, more metaphysical orientation, kind of communicating with each other. But 500 years later, whatever, from the Buddhist day, the Christianity was developed. I don't know if that's the right word, but was found to influence a huge deal for Jewish and then to European people. And I mentioned, or the Daisetz mentioned, where there was no relationship between India influenced Buddhism into Western world earlier on, unknown, but there may be something to do with that Christianity and the Judaism behind and their orientation to live, to solve the problem. And there was a discussion about the duality versus non-duality. Duality more in the sense of brain and how to deal with what happens. And for that, lots of logic-oriented actions, as in the case of all the follow-up by the rabbis in Jewish people, almost like a constitution, back and forth and discussing what is the right approach versus Indian or the Buddhist approach, kind of melting with the Chinese idea of Taoism, which is more be in the nature, no human action, but let the source of what we have, who we are, and connect to that by letting go of ego. So that's an interesting comparative situation, I think is in the background here. So it appears that if you look at the issue of how to face the challenge, and if it's coming from outside, then you grab the issue, the bottleneck, how to break through that. And those who found internal barrier, as in the case of Buddhism, instead of going outward, they go inward. And that's how the Buddhist approach may have taken place, seemed to be taking place. And Daisetz says, for that reason, there's no need to be figuring out between those two to resolve, but perhaps him pointing that if we understand the background, historical, and the tribe mentality and the needs to break through, one went more external, dualistic, within the framework of, I want to say brain, but the deeper than the brain, to have the compassion and wisdom to come out, versus the Buddhist way, that it's more like a silent meditation, sitting like in the case from Buddha, or Amida Buddha to follow that orientation. So that's just overall view, and let's stop here and maybe I'll continue after this later.